Welcome to our first What the Heck Do I Do with That Ingredient Zoom session. Something to entertain and interest us as we are trying to get creative with whatever we manage to find at the supermarket or whatever is left in our pantries. And so tonight we have 3 recipes that are going to be showcased by 3 members of Congregation B'nai Shalom. All avid home cooks, Karen Rothman and Elisa Stone and Judy Kalman. And so I'm going to be handing over to them. The format's going to be that each of them is going to take a turn to show you a particular recipe. We did post a link to those recipes on which are available as a Google file. We posted them last week, and when we post the video, we'll post a link to that same folder so that you can find the recipes after the fact. We're going to keep everybody else on mute during the session, but we'll open it up for some Q&A at the end, which people, if we're a fairly limited group, we can do on screen and in person, but also feel free to use the chat room at any time as a question comes up. We're going to save all the questions till the end, so if you want to use the chat room, I can then feed those questions over to our presenters when we get to the very end. So with that, I am going to hand over to Karen Rothman, who's going to kick us off with the first recipe of the evening.
So thank you and welcome. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and in the future when you watch it on video. I'm going to make a chocolate zucchini cake, and I have chosen this recipe because it's delicious, it's easy, and for a chocolate cake it's actually relatively healthy. So we're going to start out. If you have the directions in front of you, you can use them. Otherwise, we will be going step by step according to the directions that are online. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to move over a couple steps so that I can turn on my oven. And we're now preheating at 350. So we're going to prepare our pan here. And I know that people may have different levels of cooking expertise. So I'm going to go through some basic things. This is, first I'm just going to spray the pan, and then we're going to flour it. And so the recipe that I sent specifies a 9x9 square or round pan. This is actually a 10-inch springform pan. It can be made in basically any pan that's approximately that size. If you use a smaller pan, like an 8x8 cake pan, then you're just going to have to bake it a little bit longer, but it'll still work. So that's the pan all prepped. I'm just going to throw the extra flour in the sink. Okay, all right. Then we're going to measure 1.5 cups of flour, which I have pre-measured for you. And the recipe says that you're supposed to take a tablespoon of flour out of that pre-measured flour. And we're going to put it in with 1/4 cup. We're going to put it in with chocolate chips that have already been pre-measured. And we're just going to then mix them together. And then we're just going to set that aside. All right. So we have our medium-sized bowl with flour in it, and we have to add a few things to it. So one of the things that my mother taught me when she cooked is she said she didn't know what mise en place was, mise en place, which is what we actually technically call it. But what she said is you put all of the ingredients you have to add in on one side, and then as you use them, you're going to switch them to the other side so you can not forget to add anything. And I have to tell you that earlier today, I did not listen to my mother's advice with some dire consequences, which I will show you, which is why this is my 3rd chocolate zucchini cake that I am making today. So first we're going to add, this is 1/4 cup of cocoa, and this is, I usually use the dark cocoa, but you can use whatever kind that you wish. And then we are going to add to that, hang on, we are going to add to that salt, 1/2 teaspoon. And we also have to add baking soda, half a teaspoon. And the baking soda is what I left out this afternoon, which is why I cooked something that would be kosher for Passover. And we're also going to add nutmeg. And it says 1/4 teaspoon. You really can add however much you want. Also, if you don't have nutmeg at home, you can really add any of the spices that we sometimes call winter spices, which are things like cinnamon, apple pie seasoning, cider seasonings, and they will all work. So I'm just gonna give this a little bit of a stir. Now, the next thing I actually did beforehand because I thought that the Mixmaster would make too much noise. You don't have to use a Mixmaster, but you do have to use a blender of some sort to blend the ingredients. It says to blend it for 3 minutes. Now, your blender of some sort could actually be one of your children who's driving you crazy while you're cooking, or somebody else who is just, you need to occupy them. And it takes actually a fair amount of energy to beat something for 3 minutes. So I've already done that. So this is our liquid ingredients. We have here, we have 2 eggs, 1 1/4 cups of sugar, 1/2 cup of olive oil, and also some vanilla. And I specified in the recipe that you were supposed to do this in a very large bowl. And the reason why you want such a big bowl is because we're going to be adding cocoa powder to this. And whenever you add cocoa powder, as soon as you turn on the mixer, you actually have this cloud of cocoa puff. And it smells good, but it's not too good to breathe, and it makes a mess in the kitchen. So that's why I said a very large bowl. So I have our mixture of dry ingredients here, and the Mixmaster is over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add in these ingredients. And I'm going to put this on low, and if it's too loud, then you're going to tell me, and you're going to watch me mix by hand. So can you hear me over that? Or is it too loud? Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, all right. So what we're going to do is we're going to allow that to just mix for a couple of minutes. And in the meantime, sorry? No, sorry, Gordon's editing here, so I think we're going to switch it. He says.
No.
It's
Use
okay.
That. Use that. It's
Gordon.
a picture too close.
But then he can't hear me. Okay, we're just going to switch to the regular mixing bowl here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix it up for a couple of minutes. And I'm going to throw it in the sink because someone's going to be cleaning that up later. All righty, so we're going to mix this all together for a couple of minutes. And we're almost done with the cake, actually. But while I'm mixing, what I wanted to tell you is that when I made it earlier today, I forgot to add that baking soda because I wasn't listening to my mother, who always told me this is really important when you bake, because when you get interrupted by something, you're going to forget to add an ingredient. So I have an extra cake that I will be showing you, which is lovely and tastes good probably, but it is quite flat. Alrighty, so everything is mixed together, and now we're just going to add our zucchini. So this is shredded zucchini. Now, the end of the season when zucchini is really growing, then what I do is I usually buy a bunch of zucchinis and I just I shred them and I put them into these 1-cup containers, and then I just freeze them like that. And you just have to defrost it and it's ready to go. The only thing is that zucchini has a lot of water in it, so that usually what I'll do is that if a recipe calls for a cup, I usually actually put in about 1.25 cups of zucchini so that I can, that'll allow for the water that comes out. And it comes to a volume of about 1 cup altogether. But again, the recipe is very forgiving, and you can put in whatever amount that you can put in 1.5 cups if you want. I know zucchini sounds like it's a disgusting thing to put in a cake, especially if you have people in your family that won't eat anything that's green, but you actually can't even see it when it's baked in there, and it just makes it moist. the last thing that we have to do is we have to add our chocolate chips and flour mixture. And the reason why we added flour to the chocolate chips is that if you don't add a little bit of flour when you toss in something heavier like chocolate chips, or if you're making a different recipe with blueberries or something like that, they always have you add a little bit of flour. And the purpose of that is to make sure that whatever yummy things that you added in don't sink to the bottom of the pan when you're baking. All right, so we're all mixed, and all we have to do is to put it in our pan. So we put it in the pan, and the oven is almost preheated. And then once it's in the oven, we're going to work on our glaze. All righty. I'm going to spread this around. This is not going to make, this is going to be a fairly flat cake when you make it in a 10-inch springform pan. I just made in a pan that was kind of on the big side because I just wanted to show you the flexibility of the recipe. Usually when I make it, I usually make it in either an 8 or 9-inch round pan or a 9-inch square pan. All right, so we are ready to go into the oven. All right, and we are going to set our timer for 30 minutes. The recipe says 30 to 35 minutes. I'm going to put it on about 28 minutes. I don't know how your oven cooks. You may not know how your oven cooks either. So put it on a little bit less, and we're just going to put it in to cook. Sorry. Okay, now I have a little chocolate on the microwave, but that's okay. All righty, so while that cooks, we're going to make the glaze for the cake. Now, in order to, when you glaze this particular cake, the cake has to be cool. So you could wait till the cake is actually already out of the oven to prepare the glaze. For purposes of this cooking demonstration, just like they do on TV, I have one just about magically ready to go. I'm going to take the glaze out of the microwave, which I think it actually is ready, or it may take another minute. Nope, the glaze is ready to go. I just wanted to show you what it looked like undone, though. So I particularly like to make this recipe for Rosh Hashanah because the ingredients in the glaze are chocolate chips and olive oil and honey. So this has honey in it too. So that's going to be our glaze. So this is before it goes in the microwave, and this is after it comes out of the microwave. Okay. And then we have to actually glaze our cake. So I'm going to bring over the cakes. And I said cakes because I actually made 2 of them. So this is what happens when you talk to someone on the phone while you're baking and you make something without baking soda. So it is just about completely flat. But I know Judy and Elisa and I and some of the other good cooks on here know that you should never throw anything away. So it's still going to be, it's a very dense preparation now, but what I'm going to do with this is that if Elisa will take it, I happen to know she really loves chocolate cookie crumbs. So what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to leave it out for a couple of days, let it get stale and crumble it, and it'll be great over ice cream. And I would much rather Elisa eat that than me. But we're going to leave that aside. All righty, so here is the other cake that I made, and I'm just going to unmold it from my springform pan. And you can see it's still not super high. It's about maybe 1.5 inches high. If you made it in an 8-inch round pan, it would come out about 2 to 2.5 inches high. So you have to elevate it. for presentation. So here's a lovely cake platter that my mother actually gave me. So I'm using that in her honor, even though unfortunately she can't connect to this because she doesn't have a computer. And I'm just gonna ice the cake. Now, you're probably thinking this really doesn't look too spectacular. So what I usually do is I actually usually make 2 of them, and I make twice as much glaze. And then what I do is I add the second one to the top so that I can have a higher cake. And you can let it drip over the sides. We can clean the plate later. And we are now all iced. And then the other thing I like to do is I always like to add a little extra ingredient. So this is something I also happen to have in my freezer. I'm a real King Arthur fan. These are called cinnamon sweet bits, and I wish you could smell them. They are really good. You could use mini chocolate chips or regular chocolate chips, but what I'm gonna do is I just poured a little bit out into a cup, and what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put them over it, just a little bit. You could add chopped nuts if you wanted, or really you could use a combination of things, but it just adds a little bit of prettiness to it. It's simple, and when the other cake is ready to unmold, I'll just add that to the top of it, and that will be dessert tonight. That's it.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was wonderful. And we're all sitting here licking our lips. So we're going to move on to our second recipe of the evening. I'm going to invite Elisa to come on up and take it away. Thank you for that delicious demonstration, Karen.
My pleasure.
Hello, good evening. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Cool. Well, I selected to make for tonight pumpkin kibbe. And one of the reasons, well, there's actually 2 primary reasons. One, I wanted to give an offering that was vegetarian and even vegan friendly, so that we had that option as Judy was going to make her kung pao chicken, and there's other substitutions you can do around that based on your dining preference. But the other reason I selected pumpkin kibbe was how forgiving a dish it is. And unlike baking, where you're needing to use things in ratios so you get the proper rise or what it is that you're looking for, more of a chemistry experiment, anything that I choose to make for dinner is usually savory and, as I said, very forgiving. So I go by my palate as opposed to the recipe. The recipe is just what starts me off. So I hope you try this, and I hope you experiment and enjoy it as much as I do. So this is what it looks like at the end. I thought I'd start with the end and work a little bit backwards. It has 2 layers, a layer at the bottom of the pumpkin kibbe, and then a filling in the middle, which is largely chickpeas and spinach, and then another layer of the pumpkin kibbe on top. This is half the recipe, so it fit nicely in the half of my loaf pan. And now I'll complete the other half, so you know that this is about the volume that it fills up. So think of it like a meatloaf, right? There you go. I'm going to start off, though, with our cut kibbe layers. And I'm actually going to hold off on one ingredient, which is my egg. The egg is the only raw ingredient in this entire dish. So you wouldn't want to eat a raw egg. So I don't want to taste as I go, knowing that I have a raw egg. So I leave that to the end so that my palate is doing the talking for how much I add to my ingredients. And speaking of which, I have started out with a can of pumpkin. It's just a little shy of the 2 cups that the recipe calls for, and that's okay. Maybe if I had a sweet potato, I would add a little more to it or substitute out. That's just fine. And then the recipe says, if you use a can of just straightforward pumpkin, use pie spices. So I picked up from Penzeys, one of my favorite purveyors, and in pumpkin or in apple pie spice is simple: cinnamon, nutmeg, mace, and cloves. and I didn't have mace at home, but I had all the other spice ingredients. So whatever you decide to do is fantastic. And again, it's more or less to palate. So I'll add in my apple pie spices that way. So that is the pumpkin, now suitably spiced. And the next ingredient is our bulgur wheat. Who has this in their pantry? Judy's gonna raise her hand. Oh, look at that, most of you. And you can't figure out always how to use it, right? There you go. So I pre-measured our bulgur, and that goes. And I used all-purpose flour. You can use the flour, however, of your choice. This is the part where you'd normally add the egg, holding off. This is my pepper mill. I love coarse ground pepper, and my husband, as a gift, he found a mill that actually you can vary the grind on it. So if you want it like super chunky, like you're gonna do a steak au poivre, that would be great. Otherwise, it can go as fine as table pepper. And I always use my kosher salt as well in this little flask so that I could sprinkle in. I start small and then I build up because you can't take it away. Allspice is one ingredient. There we go. And that actually calls out for a teaspoon, but I'm just gonna eyeball it because that's what I do. And garlic. I like to use fresh. I typically always have a couple bulbs of garlic on hand, and my youngest daughter, Kelsey, just tried an experiment where she has now potted some bulbs to grow her own garlic. So I'm gonna let her finish her experiment and let me know how that went, but it's just easy. She said you take one of the cloves, and it's, you know, when you bought them and they're sprouted, and I think she soaked it in a little bit of water until it got some roots on it, and off she went into some soil. And if you've been watching Food Network or any cooking show, you see they're very happy, the chefs, taking a grater that you have around, whatever coarseness you like, and taking your clove and holding it from the tippy top, the woody stem, and when I'm done, I just pitch the woody stem, and I've got my garlic. Now it's time to stir. I've got all my ingredients in, but for the olive oil, so I'm going to add that. I'm going to taste it afterward, adjust my seasonings, and add my egg. And when I'm done with this kibbe mixture, it goes into the refrigerator, not because it has to with the egg, but what you want to do is set it up. Right now it's all at room temperature. And if I'm trying to make a lasagna-like dinner with the layers, it would be very hard at this moment to have my top layer at a consistency that's easy to spread thin or thin enough. Okay, that's all mixed. Here goes. Aside from the crunchiness, right, of the buckwheat, woo, garlic. I think I'm good. So I'm gonna go ahead and crack my egg. And I know not everyone loves to crack an egg over their dish. I do. And it's a nod to my grandmother, because my Nana Teddy, I always knew she made it from scratch if it had an egg in it, because I always got the eggshell. The other reason is I know if, too, you see blood in the yolk, you might want not to use that egg. Okay, so that is all mixed and ready to go in the fridge. So hang on, I'm gonna put this in the fridge. And I'm going to move us to my stove because now we're ready for the filling. Thanks. Here we are at the stove, ready for our filling. And I've prepped all the ingredients, which were only a few, and things that you have probably readily around your house. What I'm going to do first is start my onions, because that's about all the cooking there is to this dish. They are pretty well diced because I wanted them to cook quicker for tonight's demonstration, but really any size will do. If you have them pre-chopped and you freeze them yourself in a baggie, that's fantastic. Otherwise, you can dice them however you'd like. Fresh, frozen, no matter. Probably even dehydrated will work if you don't even want to fuss with a stove. So these are going. And also in the day, I actually made from fresh spinach. I steamed it out and I squeezed out all the water, and that's what it looks like. It's the same as if I had a package from my freezer, which is already pre-cooked, and I always look for leaf spinach as opposed to any other kind of variety. Usually has the stems, and I just find that's a little more fiber than what I would like in my diet. So I actively look for the cut leaf or whole leaf spinach in the freezer. Otherwise, I'll just do it myself. So we want these onions to just saute probably till they're right before caramelizing, and they're a little translucent and tender, because they won't cook out as long in the oven to have that consistency. But to the onions, I'm going to add my spinach and the rest of the ingredients. So we're just going to pretend that those onions cooked up a little bit more than they are. So I buy a lot of garbanzo beans. I happen to really enjoy them in salads and snacking. I tend to look for low sodium, but I always rinse them under the water anyway. And for this dish, you could use the whole garbanzo bean, but I find because we're making layers, I like to chop up the garbanzos. It tends to spread out a little easier and evenly. So I'm going to add those in. And again, this is all pre-cooked. So other than the onion, you can taste whenever you want. All right, so after the spinach, the chickpeas, the onion, pine nuts. I'm going to say it's an optional ingredient. If you have a nut allergy, certainly you don't want to be using the nuts. You can find pine nuts in all kinds of packaging, so if you don't use them right away and you buy a bigger package, I would suggest freezing. I freeze all my nuts because you don't want the oils, etc. They degrade over time and spoil, and they get a terrible taste. So I leave all my nuts in my freezer. I tend to buy pine nuts. I don't use them as frequently, but I like them for this dish. So I'll buy the diamond walnut variety or whatever's in the package. And actually, for this dish tonight, rather than using my pine nut, I had already some leftover slivered almonds that I had pre-toasted for a different dish. And I thought, I'm going to substitute out my pine nuts, which are pricey, for my lower cost nut, but I'm not going to add them since I've already toasted them into my pan. But had I started with them in the raw state or the pine nut in the raw state, I would add them into my saute dish. So I'm going to hold those off to the end so they don't get over caramelized. That is the nut. Lemon juice. A couple tricks for me is I love this particular juicer. I found it in Marshall's, TJ Maxx, whatever it was. I have an insert here. Can you see that's a regular, I would say, citrus size. And then I have one that's a little bit larger that you place on top of this. So if I'm doing something more like a grapefruit and orange, I can equally juice that. It's fantastic. And I don't put anything to waste. So I love to use lemon zest, and what I typically do is I will zest my skin after I've juiced it, because you can really hold it much easier than before you've juiced it. And with my same garlic grater, I'll just go ahead and do the zest. We'll pretend I did enough. The recipe calls for a couple tablespoons of juice, so I will add that in as well. And give it a little stir. I can smell it. I wish you could. It's delicious smelling. All right, next is olive oil. A couple tablespoons on that, and I actually already added some in with my onions. So that's just a little bit more to give it a zhuzh. And more garlic, because what is Mediterranean cooking without garlic? There we go. Fantastic. And my little salt pot, a little kosher salt. My pepper mill. There we go. And the trick of this dish is a few spices that I believe everyone who bakes should have. And if not, you might want to go pick some up when you can. Nutmeg. I like to use the whole guy. Cinnamon. And the last is allspice. Okay. And that is the filling. It's that simple. So can you see in my pan? I think so. Fantastic. So I'm going to add in my nuts. We'll pretend that that is done. Great. And I'll be heating up my oven to about 400. And it's just me and my husband, so we use our countertop conventional oven to death. I barely use the big bad wall oven over there. It takes up a lot more energy. And the last step was just assembly. So on the bottom of my baking dish, and feel comfortable whatever type of baking dish you'd like to use, I did a not exactly an ungenerous little zhuzh of olive oil, because when it starts to cook, it gets nice and toasty, roasty at the bottom, and I love that crunch. So olive oil. I separated my kibbe mixture in about half and pressed that down into the bottom, smooth it out, and then I had my layer of my filling, put that totally in, and then the remaining half of my kibbe up top. Did a very nice drizzle again of olive oil, and off to the races into the oven. And that is our pumpkin kibbe.
Thank you, Elisa. We've got delicious smells coming at us.
I wish I could share.
Greatly appreciated. And we move on to our third and final chef of the night, Judy Kalman. So I'm just going to unmute her and make her the star of the show, and we're off.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your interest. I chose Kung Pao chicken mainly because, well, a couple of reasons. One, I really like it. The other is it's really fast, and I started to develop a repertoire of recipes that were fast because I was working until last year when I retired. And I thought it was particularly good for tonight because virtually everything is in your pantry already, and with shopping being somewhat limited, and in order to minimize going out and exposing ourselves, I thought it would be good to have a recipe where you could either find the ingredients in your pantry or substitute one thing for another. So you see the list of ingredients that were posted. There's 2 sauces. I started out making 2 sauces, and in the interest of time, I did pre-make them. The sauce and the marinade are basically the same. I think you can probably see this bowl. They are soy and rice vinegar, sugar, and cornstarch-based sauces, which is very typical of Asian cuisine. The marinade is a little thicker than the sauce that you're going to use in the end, which I just showed you. And also, in the interest of time, I cut up the chicken already, and you can see the marinade is a little thicker and clinging to the raw chicken that is in this bowl. With regard to the chicken, one of the secrets of this recipe is to cut the chicken rather, diced. You can do it sliced if you like that kind of texture better. But whether you pick diced or sliced, the key is to make the pieces uniform. You want them all to cook the same, and it certainly adds to the sight appeal, how it's going to look. And your vegetables also, you want to cut pretty much the same size as the chicken. I'll show you my vegetables in a minute, and those 2 should be uniform. The key to all of that is obviously have a really good knife. Okay, so I want to mention also, Elisa brought up about the vegetarian cooks that might be viewing this, and this recipe works really, really well with tofu. And before we started before we went live, we were talking about whether this could be made with swordfish or salmon or something too, and it probably could. If you are doing it with tofu, you want the tofu to mimic the texture of the chicken, so you'd want to press out the water first in between 2 plates with a paper towel and a couple of cans, and you press the water out for about 15-20 minutes. Make it feel like chicken, and then cut it, and the recipe would be exactly the same. All right, so while we were talking, I started, I think you can see my pan here. I put a little oil in the pan, and I'm going to start by cooking 1/2 cup of nuts with some red pepper flakes. And this is only going to take a minute or 2. And the key with nuts is you really have to keep your eye on them because they burn really, really easily. I am very fortunate to have a brother-in-law who owns a nut and chocolate business. So I get really, really good nuts, but any kind of nuts that you find in the supermarket are fine. These are unsalted peanuts, unsalted roasted peanuts. That's what you want. You could also use raw ones, but definitely keep to the unsalted ones because the soy sauce is going to be so salty that you don't want any more salt in your nuts. So those are going to just cook for a minute or 2, and you're going to keep your eye on it. You're going to move it around. In the meantime, my chicken is marinating, and because I prepared that, and I'll show you the vegetables that I prepared so I can show you something else while we're talking. So the recipe calls for 1 red pepper and 2 scallions diced. And you can see, let me take a spoon, you can see I tried to make them really, really square and nice, everything the same size. I also, the white that you see is also water chestnuts because I like a lot of crunch. So we added some water chestnuts to the recipe. If you don't have red pepper, use a green pepper. You could use zucchini, you could use broccoli stems. Anything that has a crunch will work. I prefer, if I have a red pepper, to use the red pepper. I also added to this bowl the ginger because according to the recipe, the ginger, the red pepper, and the scallions are all going to be added at the same time. So why not make it easy on yourself and using the mise en place technique, set it up ahead of time so you can just dump it into the pan when you're ready. All right, so these are getting done. Let's see. The other thing that we can talk about for a minute while we're waiting here is what to do if you don't have a certain ingredient. For the sauce, for example, it calls for a 1/4 cup of chicken broth. I have a really hard time keeping chicken broth in the house because we do keep kosher and it's really hard to get kosher chicken broth in the supermarket. And so I always have on hand the powdered kind by Osem is a good one. And I it's really not going to matter that it doesn't have the texture in this dish of the broth. It's the flavor and the volume of the liquid that you're after. So I just took a teaspoon or so of powdered chicken broth, and I made my own. And that shows you know how versatile this recipe is. If you don't have rice wine vinegar, which is a major part of the sauce and the marinade, you can use any kind of vinegar in your house. Just add a teaspoon of sugar. Now I'm gonna take the nuts out before they burn, and I'm gonna toss them into a big bowl, because after we stir fry the chicken a little bit, we're gonna add the chicken to the nuts while we do the second batch of chicken, because we do it twice in order to make sure that the chicken cooks uniformly. So I'm gonna just dump the peanuts out. No need to wash the pan, because you're gonna add a little more oil and just keep going. So that's what makes this recipe really fast. So while I do that, I just wanted to mention too that the recipe does call for, I think it's a quarter teaspoon of sugar in one of the sauces and maybe a teaspoon in the other. We are watching our sugar in our house, so we use Splenda, and that works out perfectly. All right, so now the next step is going to be to take half of the chicken and put it in the pot pan, the pan pot, and kind of spread it out. I'll tip the pan so you can see. You're gonna spread it out because you want it just all in one flat layer. And you're not gonna, I used the term stir fry, but I shouldn't have, because you really kind of let it alone. So let's let it alone for a minute. And this is half the chicken, because you don't want it all clouded up. And as soon as you see it starting to turn white on one side, you're gonna just turn it over and spread it out again. You want to get all the pink out, but you don't have to worry about cooking the middle, because it's going to cook some more in the sauce. So don't worry about it cooking through. Just worry about getting a nice white coating on the outside of both sides. So you're really supposed to kind of let it sit there for a minute without touching too much. So let's just let that cook for a minute. In the interest of not having to have you watch me fry the chicken twice, I did half of it, and it's in with the peanuts. So we only have to do this once, even though the recipe tells us to do it twice. The top of it's already made. I don't like how the chicken on top looks pink to me, so I am gonna flip it over a little one more time. I don't want to see pink. You don't want to eat raw chicken, that's for sure. All right, so got one more little pink piece here. I'll press it down a little, maybe that'll help make it speed it up a little. Also, I have some rice going on. We're having black rice tonight, mainly because I had a 3/4 of a cup of black rice left. We're out of brown rice, and I don't like to eat white rice. So we're sort of stuck with the black rice, which is absolutely delicious. I'm sure it'll work fine. And I don't know if you've tried to get rice in the supermarket for the last couple of weeks, but it's virtually impossible. Okay, so this chicken looks like it is not pink anymore. So I am going to take the peanuts and the chicken that I cooked earlier in the day, right before we went live, and I'm gonna scrape this out. I'm gonna make sure my temperature is high enough here, and I'm gonna cook it for a minute or two. My husband smelled food, so he kind of started coming over, and he's lurking around in the background. All right, so you can hear it sizzle, I think, huh? I'm gonna put it up nice and high. my little dial goes from high to number 2. So I have it on 8 right now. I don't want it on 10, but I don't want it on 2 either. So, and the recipe will tell you to cook it for a minute or 2. And at this point, I am stir frying just a little because I want to make sure it all cooks up evenly. I wish you could smell this because it smells really good. Right. It cooks so fast because the chicken pieces are small and the nuts are already cooked. Now I'm going to take my vegetables and add them all at once. Put the bowl in the sink. Wanted to rinse my spatula there. And I want to move it around a little. The vegetables take about a minute. You can see how pretty it is. I think you can see this. I'll tip it so you can see.
Judy, when you tip, can you move a little center into the center of your camera? Because we're not seeing it from the edge. There we go, a little more.
A little more?
Right, that's
Okay.
it. Now we've got a good view.
Okay, I think maybe I can, how's that, better? A little better, I tipped the camera a little bit. All right. This is, again, another minute. Meantime, your rice is cooking. Sometimes if I weren't in front of the camera, I would start to set the table. I can tell by hearing it where it is in its cooking stage. So I can walk away for a minute. If I weren't on camera, I'd set the table, I'd get the napkins out and so on. Okay, so now it's been in the pan for maybe another minute. So now I'm going to give a stir to the sauce because it has cornstarch in it, and if you don't stir it right before you use it, the cornstarch tends to go to the bottom. So I want to make sure it's kind of smooth. And I also have the added challenge here of that chicken broth, making my own chicken broth. I don't want to see any granules. So it looks nice and smooth, and I'm going to add this in like so. Switch my spoon. That was a metal spoon. I don't want to use metal with the Calphalon pan. So I'm going to switch again to the plastic. And there you have it. I'm going to let this cook another minute or so until the sauce gets thicker, and so it doesn't look liquidy anymore. And I should have reserved a couple of scallions or a couple of peanuts on the side to dress it up a little. I could also put a little bit of sesame seeds once it's plated. But let me put my my gloves on, and I'll pick this up so you can see it a little better. What do you think?
Come
Looks
over a
good?
little bit more to the middle. You know, the other way.
The other way?
Other way. Other way. Yep. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. A little further.
Going. Yeah.
Now we can see it. Now we
Can
can
you
see
see
it.
how pretty that
That
is?
looks great.
Yeah. And it's done, and I think it's going to look really nice over the black rice.
Absolutely delicious. Thank you so much, Judy.
Thank you very much.
So we've had 3 wonderful recipes and wonderful timing by our chefs. I see that we've had some fun chat, but no specific questions. If anybody who's on live with us at the moment has a question they want to ask, something they want to clarify, an idea to add or adjust an ingredient to spice up the recipes you've seen. We've got about 5 minutes left of our hour together, and you can unmute yourself and offer something that you'd like to share.
I have a question for Elisa. Can you put another layer of vegetables and another layer of kibbe on top of what you have there?
I think you could always do that, but you will miss then the crustiness in the middle, you know,
Right.
since it's making more or less a sandwich. And I cut into, I know it's really hard to see that layer, but there is the layer, but it's crunchy on top, it's crunchy on the bottom. I drizzled some lemon as well because I'm a lemon fiend. And I also wanted to mention, for anybody who would be vegan, obviously you would leave out that egg, as I did and only added it at the last moment. I don't know if there's a substitute for an egg as a binder, but I'm not thinking it's necessarily essential. Karen has an idea.
You actually can, and in fact, you can use an ingredient that you already used, because chickpeas, if you buy cooked chickpeas that are cooked, that people who are vegans oftentimes use the liquid in the chickpeas in place of egg. So you can, rather than discarding that juice, you can actually use the chickpea.
Nice.
And can you use a different grain, like farro or something like that?
I think you can give anything a shot and let us know how it works. Why not?
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry.
So I have a question also for Lisa. Did you cook the kibbe or the bulgur beforehand?
I did. Not the bulgur. I cooked the finished kibbe in my oven that was about 400 degrees. And this was,
How long does that have to cook for?
I do it till I look at it and I see that it's browned. Again, it was one egg in this half a recipe that I made. I want to say it was 400 degrees for maybe 25 minutes.
Okay, no, wait a minute. I'm not asking the question right.
Okay.
I think that
I think you said you could use bulgur if you have it.
I'm sorry, sir, I couldn't hear you. Karen was trying to answer your question.
Okay, did you say you could use bulgur?
I did use bulgur. That's what it is.
Okay, so did you cook the bulgur before you just put it in raw? Okay, you're
Yep.
both in sync with your head nodding. Yeah.
There's enough moisture that it cooks out.
And so I guess what surprised me is that you tasted it before you put it in to cook, unless you were tasting the finished product.
No, I was tasting those seasonings to make sure I got it right.
Okay.
And then I added my egg, which I didn't want to eat raw egg.
Great. Okay. All right. My comment is, I wish you could, all three of you could invite us for dinner tonight, but
Me too.
oh well. I'll just have to taste it in my own virtual taste buds.
You know, it'll be nice when we're over and on the other side. We should do a lovely dinner of our
Yeah.
recipes and come together, right?
I love that idea.
Yeah. Terrific.
Karen, I'm gonna come over. Will you leave some of the cake on the porch for me?
I was going to ask Elisa, leave that other half on the front. I'll pick that up.
You bet.
I'm not kidding, really. Are you slicing into it?
The cake?
Yeah.
All of it. Well, and they always say, life is short, eat dessert first. So that's what I have cooked so far is the cakes. That may be our first course tonight.
That was like
I made a turkey dinner today. I made a complete turkey dinner from we have a few leftover turkeys from Thanksgiving. They're as good as the day after. And Nancy Lonstein got one for her whole crowd because her whole family moved in with her.
Oh.
And so she's cooking one tomorrow. So we don't have dessert though.
Although I hear, Marsha, you know a thing or two about baking pies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Baking on one of
know.
these sessions.
I could do that.
Marsha, I'd be happy to give you one.
Our time is just about up, so I just want to do a final check-in. Any additional questions from those of you who joined us live?
Just a comment, if anybody has any suggestions for ideas, if you feel like you want to do this again, then let us know that and give us suggestions for ideas. We have a vote so far for Passover recipes for next week. So we will try to do that, but we'll take other ones too.
Karen, you know, it's a good one to do is that one we both love, the Moosewood Cookbook potato pancake layer quiche.
Yeah, the cauliflower quiche. Yep.
I do it with broccoli and mushrooms. You can do it with
How about shakshuka?
Oh, we could do that.
That we might hold off for that to be a post-Passover one. Once we get after Passover, we can maybe do a Yom Ha'atzmaut Israel-themed cooking session.
Let's do that, yeah.
Well, that's great. I have a great stuffed eggplant that would be lovely for Israel.
We've got plenty of ideas flowing here. We'll just have to make the slots for them. Thank you again, Karen, Elisa, and
Thank you so much, all of you.
Very nice.
Beautiful.
have a good evening, everyone.
Bon appetit.